In the year 1965, the skies over North Vietnam would be filled with the thunder of American air power. This was the beginning of a sustained and massive campaign of strategic bombing, an offensive codenamed Operation Rolling Thunder.
An important part of the United States' effort to stop communist aggression in Southeast Asia is the air war against North Vietnam. These airstrikes are directed principally against lines of communication, power plants, fuel storage depots, military air bases, and industrial facilities with war-making potential. They are intended to disrupt and delay infiltration of North Vietnamese troops and supplies to the south in their continuing war of aggression against South Vietnam. Over 80% of the United States Air Force attacks over North Vietnam originate from Royal Thai Air Force bases in Thailand. Without these bases, the ability of the United States to disrupt and delay the North Vietnamese infiltration efforts would be greatly limited. The effort is a huge one, involving many bases, many aircraft, many specialties. There is great activity at the Royal Thai Air Force bases every day and night. Much of the maintenance and armament work must be done at night. The daylight hours are taken up with launching and recovering aircraft and fast turnarounds for second missions. Operating under conditions that are often extremely difficult and always urgent, the maintenance and armament crews have distinguished themselves in performing their essential services. While the day strike force is preparing for tomorrow's battle, the night fighters continue to keep pressure on communist infiltrators. A-26 and T-28 aircraft strike truck routes and troop staging areas. As C-123 and C-130 flare ships light the terrain in the southern part of North Vietnam. Also at night, B-52s from U Tapao bomb troop concentrations and supply buildups in unpopulated areas. These B-52s are a part of the bomber force providing the greatest concentration of massed firepower in the history of air warfare. At Korat and Tak Ly, F-105s are loaded with bombs for use against heavily defended targets in the north. At Uban, F-4 aircraft are loaded with air-to-air missiles used to defend against MiG aircraft. At U Tapao, KC-135 tankers depart for a rendezvous with fighter aircraft on their way to their targets. EC-121s at Korat, EB-66s at Tak Ly carry specialists to conduct electronic warfare against the fierce anti-aircraft forces in North Vietnam. From Udorn and Nakhon Phanom, Jolly Green Giant helicopters are preparing to go to the rescue of any pilots that might be shot down during or after the raids. A-1E Sandys will accompany the Jolly Green Giants to protect them during rescue operations. At Udorn, film is loaded in cameras of RF-4 reconnaissance planes to record the results of the bombing strikes. Fighters head for their targets. Fighter aircraft on strike missions consume large amounts of fuel, and many require aerial refueling on their way to and from the target. The strike force has been assigned a variety of targets. Most North Vietnamese targets are defended by the most formidable air defense system in history. Flak. Russian-built SAM missiles and MiGs. Despite this awesome defense, Air Force fighter bombers drop thousands of tons of bombs on bridges, ferries, railway lines, highways, troop staging areas, munitions depots, missile sites, fuel storage depots, and MiG bases. In those instances where communist MiGs have challenged them, American aircraft and air crews have proven to be far superior, even though North Vietnamese pilots are capable and aggressive. F-4s do most of the MiG fighting, but F-105s have also shot down a number of enemy aircraft. The strike force begins its flight back to Thailand. In the southern area of North Vietnam, a forward air controller has spotted a target of opportunity that calls for airstrikes. Barrels of oil, intended for use by the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong. Farther north, Jolly Green Giants go to the rescue of a pilot downed in hostile territory. Rescue operations require a high level of teamwork involving 3 different types of aircraft. An HC-130 monitors distress signals. A-1Es locate the downed flyer and suppress ground fire. The Jolly Green Giant performed the actual rescue. An average mission includes 2 helicopters, 4 fighters, and the HC-130. All Jolly Green crews are trained in rescue techniques for all area terrains, in escape and evasions, and in jungle and water survival. Back at Royal Thai Air Force bases, the aircraft return after the day's strike. Even as the fighters are landing, RF-4C reconnaissance aircraft return to the strike zone to record the damage on film. How successful was the mission? The reconnaissance aircraft will soon bring back the answer. Here is what the cameras recorded. Air bases with supersonic aircraft parked in revetments. Road and bridge surveillance photography. bridges that have been knocked out, rebuilt, and knocked out again. Surface-to-air missile sites with their camouflaged control and guidance vans. Direct hits on power plants, like this one near Hanoi. Convoys and truck parks. At times, the camera catches the North Vietnamese anti-aircraft gunners napping. High-altitude photographs covering a wide area. And low-altitude shots of specific targets, like this railroad car repair facility. These reconnaissance photographs provide accurate intelligence, essential to target selection. The new supersonic F-111 is now operating out of Tok Lee Royal Thai Air Force Base. This aircraft, featuring a revolutionary terrain-following radar, is being tested under actual combat conditions. The AC-130 Gunship II has also been added to the inventory and is now operating out of Ubon Royal Thai Air Force Base. This aircraft is proving highly effective against night infiltration. Under the CETO agreement, as part of the Mutual Defense Assistance Program, F-102 fighter interceptors are stationed at Udorn and Don Muang Royal Thai Air Force bases to augment the Royal Thai Air Force in its air defense of Thailand. During his visit to Thailand, the President of the United States defined the role of air power in deterring communist aggression.
It is a factor of utmost importance to the future of the peace of Asia, and for that matter, the peace of the entire world, that aggressors never again will be able to assume that aggression through cruel and brutal and sadistic wars of national liberation will ever be either economic or successful. Air power is denying aggression access to cheap success or to ultimate victory.
I grew up in Bremen, Georgia, about an hour west of here. Graduated from high school there. Came to Georgia Tech in 1952. Met Pat Epps along the way. We graduated in 1956. I had been accepted for pilot training with the Air Force after ROTC, but was delayed for a year on that to go on active duty. So I worked for Lockheed out here in Marietta. And then in 1957, I entered pilot training down in Bainbridge, Georgia. I was very fortunate, flew the first group that flew the T-37. Went from there to Laredo, Texas, T-33, and got my wings. Came back to Moody Air Force Base flying F-86Ls.
What put you on a track to go into ROTC and then into the Air Force? Is that something you wanted to do since you were a kid, or when did that kick in for you?
Well, growing up during World War II, formative years, I heard about these guys, flying tigers, running around China, strafing trains and doing things in the big raids. And I thought that must be really neat. But I never thought I'd get a chance at it until I got to Tech and found out there was ROTC and that I could have a chance.
And what made you choose Tech?
Probably because of the football team right then. Plus, my next door neighbor was a ham radio operator, and he convinced me that if I went to Tech and got an electrical engineering degree, my future was secure.
At what point in your Air Force career did you get introduced to the F-105?
I was in graduate school at Southern California in 1965-66. And while I was there, I was thinking I'm going to miss out on this war because I had a lot of friends that already had assignments. But I received an assignment at the time before I finished out there for the 105. And the sequence of events was I'd go to survival school at the completion and then to Nellis Air Force Base and check out in the 105 to go to Tak Lee, Thailand.
So when you were at Nellis, how often did you get into Las Vegas?
Surprisingly, I didn't go down there as much as you'd think during that time. We were pretty busy. I went out a few times to make sure I wasn't going to win any extra money.
Tell me as much as you can remember about your journey to Vietnam. How did they get you over there? Did you fly an airplane over there, or did they ship you some other way? Just tell us about going to Vietnam and your first impressions of being there.
Okay. I left from Fort Walton Beach, Eglin Air Force Base in the end of March of 1967. I flew commercially to San Francisco and then up to Travis Air Force Base, where I was on a military contract flight that island hopped to the Philippines, Clark Air Base, and I went through jungle survival school there for about 10 days. And then I flew again on a contract flight to Bangkok, and then on a military airplane, C-47, the old Goonie Bird, up to Tak Lee.
And what do you remember about stepping off an airplane for the first time?
I had a very memorable introduction. The fellow who was the ops officer for my squadron and the one who became my flight commander subsequently said, "Welcome to the 354th, the highest loss rate squadron in Southeast Asia." Yeah, what a good deal. And about a week later, I went up and met with the wing commander who welcomed the new people. And he told us that in 2 years of operation, the track record was in the 100 missions or 1 year tour, you had a 50-50 chance of being shot down. If you were shot down, you had a 50-50 chance of being rescued. Welcome to the war.
You know, most pilots are in love with the airplane that they flew, but some of those loss rates had to do with the airplane you were flying, correct?
The loss rate, I think, was primarily the mission. But backing up, when I was in graduate school and we knew people were getting assignments, I had volunteered or indicated an interest in every airplane in Southeast Asia except the F-105. And that was based on a briefing from Colonel Yeager when he was head of the test pilot school. He described it as an electronic monster. Can't understand why the Air Force wasted their money on this thing. So I was not particularly happy when I got my assignment. But by the time I checked out in the airplane and started flying it, I started to really like it. By the time I left to go to war, I won't say I was in love with it, but I was proud I was flying it. And the more I flew it, the prouder I was. But our mission, since we only flew in North Vietnam, made us extremely vulnerable. We didn't have much, milk runs. Maybe on a bad weather day, you'd do a recce down in Route Pack 1 north of the DMZ. And that was pretty easy, but I was on my 47th mission and 31 of them were in the Hanoi area. I'd already beaten the odds 2 or 3 times. I never got to meet Colonel Oles, but he was the commander of the 8th Wing over at Ubon when I was flying, and they flew MiG-Cap on several missions into Hanoi that I was on. But I did not meet him personally until after the war.
So, obviously your missions were into dangerous territory, and I've read that, well, I won't get into reasons, but because of our unwillingness to stop the stuff coming in from the Russians, they had a very robust anti-aircraft defense system. So I imagine every mission was just tremendously high risk.
There were a few missions like the when we would do road recce or just general reconnaissance missions down in the lower route packs 1, 2, or 3. That were all, you almost say, were fun. Get out and roam around and see the countryside while you were doing it. But yes, when we went into the Hanoi area, the expression was when you got up there, yes, belongs to Uncle Sam, put those bums on target. And there were some missions that everything's there. We went in, at the time I was there, we'd make run-ins at low altitude around 1,500, 2,000 feet to try to stay out of the radar for the SAMs and the radar guns. Therefore, small arms fire was a risk that you had to avoid. But yeah, in the pattern that we flew, we'd pull up to about 14,000 feet and then come back in on a dive. And that's when the radar could pick you up. Where the first month or so I was there, where the MiGs would be laying for us right over Hanoi. And one mission I was on, we had MiGs going up with us in the pop. You had 105s and MiGs and 105s and MiGs, and SAMs going off and flak all around. I don't know who the MiG leader was that day, but he wasn't too smart. Oh, you could almost watch a gauge drop. I used to laugh. Say, put your hand on the floorboard, you could feel it going by. I'm trying to think. Typical fuel consumption was probably about 3,000 gallons or pounds an hour. And the afterburner jumped to a little over 6,000.
So you didn't do that unless you meant it?
No. The best I did, I guess I got it about 1.3 or 4. But that's an interesting story if you want to put on it.
Yeah, go ahead. I'd love to hear it.
We were on a mission on Sunday afternoon, and a railroad yard just northeast of Hanoi across the Red River Bridge there. And my flight leader, we were the #1 bomb flight, and there was a flak suppression flight ahead of us, and the #4 guy there had been hit and was going down under the clouds. We had about a 2,000 foot level layer. And so my flight leader says, I'm going to follow him down. So that meant me leading the mission out. And about the time I got out and got to recover right across Hanoi, and that's where we were in afterburner, accelerating out of there and jinking. A SAM went off so close that I flew through the colored cloud, which only lasted a couple of seconds. And I came back and I told him that day, I said, I think the biggest damage I did was going across Hanoi supersonic, blowing out all the windows in town. But as we got out, I was starting to climb out, and a fellow from up here in Georgia who happened to be in my squadron too, I recognized his voice, called me and he says, single 105, 18 east of 97, shake it, you got a MiG on you. So I did a split S right down through the cloud layer, pulled up, and when I did and looked out, there was a mountain ridge on either side of me out here, at least 500 feet higher than me. And I came back out of there rather subdued, to say the least. And I remember I got back and went through debriefing. And intelligence at that time, if you had a tough mission, they'd pull out this bottle of bourbon, old Overholzer, I remember, and they'd give you a shot. And I threw that down, and I started telling him about the mission. He pulled us, you like another? And I said, yeah. And I says, can I have another one? I had my third shot of bourbon. We got through the debrief, and I looked at my watch. It was about 5 minutes till evening church time. And I went down to the chapel. I knew this Methodist minister was down there, and I leaned up, and right up in his face, I said, it was a close one today, but he got me back here. I said, you think I'll be okay here? He says, he'll be glad you're here. Come on in. But that was probably my most exciting day, other than being shot down.
I guess a day you probably don't enjoy talking about, but I hope you will, July 5th, 1967. And maybe, you know, I'd love for people who, particularly young people, to understand what your day was like. Not just the fact that you were shot down, but your usual day and preparing for a mission. And all you can remember about that day would be wonderful.
I don't have any trouble talking about it. July the 5th, 1967 was obviously a very special day, and two or three things led up to that, in that I had just been appointed or signed as the executive officer of the squadron, and we were having an inspection. We had a new commander. He asked me to do a check around to make sure we were ready and get acquainted myself. So I had not flown for 3 days. I had sat as spare when they needed, but I didn't get off. And I remember on the night of the 4th of July, I wrote a letter home, and I said, well, I missed the fireworks again today, but Fergie promised me tomorrow for sure. And sure enough, I went out the afternoon mission. I dropped that report off on the commander's desk and headed out. And later on, talking to people in Hanoi when we were together, almost without exception, all of us acknowledged there was something different about the way we felt that day. We couldn't put our finger on it, but it wasn't like a normal day. And I kept trying to think the whole time, what have I forgotten? What did I do or not do, or what? And as it turns out, obviously it was that sense, I guess, of the impending, what was imminent. But in my case, I was the number 4 airplane in a second flight on a railroad siding right up near the Chinese border. And just as we started our roll-in of the first flight, there was a call for MiGs about 20 miles west of us at our altitude. So as number 4, that's part of my responsibility. So I took a quick look out there to see if I could pick them up. And I didn't see anything, but when I looked back, my leader had already started rolling in, and the flak was so thick that I couldn't see down. So I had to stay up till some bombs went off and I could see the target. Consequently, I had to adjust my roll-in. Instead of being in a 45-degree dive, I was probably at least 60 coming straight down, and I had to adjust the altitude, drop the bombs. And I flew through 3 levels. They were laying out flak at level 3, about 3,000 feet apart. I made it through the 3 of the levels of flak. But just as my bombs came off, I felt a hit. I'd been hit twice before, so it was unmistakable. But this time, my procedure was, when I dropped the bombs, was hit the afterburner, pull out, let that give me the thrust, and start my jinking. Well, when I hit the afterburner, the airplane just did a tumble. And I came back out, it stabilized, and I remember this distinctly. Boy, that'd be a heck of a ride at Coney Island. I'd never been there, but I'd heard about it. So I relaxed, put the burner back in, get out of here, and the airplane just started flipping and tumbling. And I couldn't see out because of the flames, but I was still going to try to make it as close as I could to the water. We'd come in off the Gulf, and we're going back out that way. But about that time, the camera up in front of the dash under the windscreen broke loose, and I had to duck as it went over my head. And as I was looking, the instrument panel just started crumbling, and the airplane was starting to come apart. So I leaned back, put myself in position, pulled the handles, and I remember thinking nothing happened. And boom, it's gone. And I had a very interesting experience in that I grayed out. I couldn't see anything, didn't feel anything. I was just kind of floating. I thought I was dead, literally. And then I started feeling some pressure, and my vision started coming back, and I could see a little bit of green. And then all of a sudden I could see the canopy of, the tops of the trees, and I'm coming down. And I looked up to see if the canopy was open, and it was just starting to blossom. And I reached up to get it, and when I put my hands on the risers, they collapsed. I was sitting on a log on the ground. And that all took less than 2 seconds, because had those automatic systems that got me out, pull to shoot, not worked, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. I figure I went out inverted in negative G's and probably maybe even ejected toward the ground. I don't know. No idea. But somebody up there was looking out for me that day again, like the day that over Hanoi supersonic.
You're not any place you want to be.
Well, the first thing, obviously, that I did once I was on the ground, sitting on the log, my emergency beeper was going off. Get that off so I can talk. But I couldn't get up to it. I couldn't get it cut off. I didn't think. I realized after the fact that I had, because 2 others had been shot down, and their beepers were the ones that were going off, blocking things. But I made an immediate call. Told them I was down safe. I'd check in an hour. That's really optimistic. But sitting on the log looking down was kind of ironic. I looked down and looked at the tree. This is just like North Georgia. Those hills, same kind of scrub trees and pine tree that were running around, the ground's gravelly. Then all of a sudden it dawned on me, these ain't going to be friendly North Georgia mountaineers. Everybody I see now may be looking to kill me. So I started trying to get rid of stuff. My chute was caught in the trees. I couldn't get it down. My survival kit that comes out separately had banged down, and I couldn't get it open. But I could get the side open that had the jungle hat with a mosquito net and a bottle, 2 cans of water. And I pulled out the water, stuck them in my flight suit, put the hat on, threw my helmet down the hill, hoping that would make them think I'd gone that way. And I started up the hill, which was the instructions or recommendations from survival school. And as I got to almost to the top of the hill, and I could see a path out here that I was going to go to, I hesitated just long enough. I think actually my G-suit got caught in some brambles and kept me from pushing these bushes open. And a Vietnamese ran across closer than 4 feet away. The only thing, he was in a hurry or didn't look my way. So that caused me to look around a little bit and the path, and then I saw these field wires across the way. When I leaned up and looked, I'd come down right in the gun range. There was a gun sight down here about 100 yards and another one over here about 100, 150. And so I reconsidered my actions at this point. Don't get too carried away. But I managed to get across that path without leaving a track with the boots. And I thought if I got over on the other side and down the hill, I could hide out for that hour and check in and maybe get picked up, get out of here. And I didn't realize when I got across, all the brush was over here. I was in grass, maybe a foot, 1.5 feet high. And when I got to the edge and looked down, it was a drop off into a bog. I wasn't going anywhere in that direction. So I sat down and opened one of the cans of water, and at that point I was so thirsty I didn't think there was enough water around. I took 2 sips and I thought it was going to come out my ears, all the psychological, the shock effects. But I managed to drink it, forced it down, threw the can away, and about that time I heard voices that were gathering up over here along the trail. And they were pointing and talking, and I'd heard some shots and hollering back and forth. They'd obviously found my parachute and helmet. And so they'd eliminated that side. They just really were going to come over here. And they did, and they came out. And I did this and tried to get anything white out of sight and hide down. But it turned out I wasn't going to hide under anything. They walked up and tapped me on the shoulder and welcomed me to North Vietnam. The ones that came out and got me were actually militia. They were in civilian clothes. One of them had a rifle.
I don't mean to interrupt, but these are regular North Vietnamese.
No, these are civilian. They're like militia.
Oh, okay.
They're in civilian clothes. I don't know how they fit into the system right there then, but like I say, one of them had a rifle, and they started stripping me down, And of course, when I got my pistol out over here, one of them pulls it out and looks at it. And I don't know why, it was just a sixth sense. I just happened to glance up just as he was starting to come across and hit me in the head, and I ducked and missed him. And the guy with a rifle leaned across and hit him with a butt in his chest to knock him back. And I remember thinking, you and I are going to be friends. I don't know about the others, but I like you. But they packed me down. Well, they started me, took off my boots, stripped out everything out of the flight suit. One amusing thing, I carried a half a pack of Salems because we'd been told that Ho Chi Minh liked those, and if Ho Chi Minh did, most everybody else probably would. And I carried some Winston cigarettes too. They pulled the cigarettes out, looked at them, crumbled them up, and threw them away. And I said, well, so much for intelligence. But they started walking me, and I realized if I walked very far barefooted, my feet were not going to be in a condition to do anything else. So as we started down the trail, I started watching, and I saw a root coming up, and I hooked my foot in it and fell over and convinced them that I'd hurt myself. And I got them to carry me all the way down the side of the mountain. And we stopped in a little village. They put me in a house in the back corner on a bed. And I was there, I'd say, between 30 minutes and an hour. And he came in, tapped out, and walked back out. And I got in this, I called it a safari wagon. It was bigger than a Jeep, but not as big as you see safaris nowadays, but open vehicle with a canvas top. And they put me in the back seat, one guy on each side. They're holding my arms like this, so I wasn't tied up. But I looked up as the fellow on my left in English said, "You're now the prisoner of the Chinese Liberation Army." And what I saw in front was a picture of Mao Zedong and Lin Pao, head of the premier and the head of the People's Army. And I couldn't put my hand up and do the Marine salute, but I said something, well, okay, you really did it to yourself this time. Because I figured I was gone to China, because we were that close to the border. I learned over the next 24 hours that that's why the gun sights were so good down there. The Chinese were running them all. And what we had rolled in over, literally, that got us was what we considered probably the best gun sight in North Vietnam. Of course, now I knew why. And later, in '79, when Deng Xiaoping came to this country, he acknowledged that they had 300,000 regular troops in North Vietnam for the war. So that's what they were doing. And it was also why we had been briefed about 2 or 3 weeks before that there would be no attempted rescues in the buffer zone right up near the border. That they finally acknowledged that those were the Chinese. And I'd have to say that overall, I was well treated with them. They brought me something to eat. They wanted me to do a radio broadcast, which I declined with no pressure. And that night, the commandant came in. They introduced him as the commandant. And through the translator said that if I cooperated with them, that I would be treated well, and I'd be taken to Beijing and be treated well. And I declined that kind offer also, because in 1967, Beijing and the moon were about the same distance from Atlanta, Georgia, as far as I was concerned. I did not know, I should say, that we had an F-104 pilot that had been shot down in September of '65 who was already in Beijing. And he came home when we did, and I introduced myself to him and told him my opportunity to meet him. He said, "You made a good choice." He spent 7.5 years in solitary. And after during the 24 hours with the Chinese, when I knew, they took me around the next day to various gun sites. We'd stop someplace, and about 8 or 10 guys would come out in uniform and line up. And I called him the cheerleader. The head guy would get out his little red book, and he'd read and chant and read, and he'd chant. And the translator then would say, "The U.S. will surely be defeated. The Vietnamese people will surely be victorious." Okay, that's nice. And one thing out of that, which really surprised me, was that almost every one of these guys had a camera. And when the chanting and cheerleading was all over, they'd all gang around there, all making pictures. So I had my fingers crossed that somebody was going to make a picture to get out, because I knew with my close call I was probably going to be reported as killed in action. So I cooperated with the picture making at that point as much as possible. But that afternoon, they took me up to a place, I guess it was either a subordinate or a corresponding headquarters, where I met some more regular Army. And I had, I guess you'd say, a test of wills. They started the chanting again, and this time they wanted me to say it. And I told them, no, I'm not going to say that. And one of the guys, I don't know what they smoked, but his eyes showed he had something more than issue, maybe even old Overholzer. But he comes up with his rifle and puts the bayonet right under my chin and pops it up like that, while the translator's right here saying, "You must say it." And I wouldn't shake my head. I just did kind of like that. And after 2 or 3 times like that, and for him saying, "You must say it," I finally just did my lips tight like a grim, so I'm not going to say that. And an officer obviously came up and got this guy to back off with a rifle. But I wasn't too sure there for a while, because I could see the rifle bore was clean. It was operable. But once that was over, back in the truck, back down to where I'd been before, in an area with a cave. That was my house right then. And they let me take a nap, and the commander came by and motioned like that, and went out and got in the truck and went down. They turned me over to the North Vietnamese. And I remember when they made that offer and to go to Beijing, I said, no, I want to go to Hanoi. The guy looked at me and just kind of shook his head. So when they turned me over, I laid there back out, and I wanted to shake hands with him, and we did, which is part of the story, because I hope to meet him later on. But anyway, the Vietnamese blindfolded me, and took me down, I'm pretty confident, to Kep Airfield. And I got a jet helicopter ride into Gia Lam, right downtown, and then a truck ride across the river to the big prison, Wallow. We referred to Wallow as the Hanoi Hilton.
Oh, that's
but
Hilton.
But also,
Yeah.
Hanoi Hilton tends to encompass all the camps. If you were in Hanoi, you were in the Hilton, although everybody, with few exceptions, processed through the big prison initially. And I went into New Guy Village there, learned I wasn't nearly as big, mean, and tough and strong as I thought I was. A couple of little fellas with a rope can get you to do and say things that you didn't plan to. And another one that got my arms up behind me for the better part of a day, convinced me to do some things. It had been opened in, I think, summer, June, July area of '66. And they called it the farm, because out the edge of town, and you could hear the chickens and the animals and things around, and they named the buildings for things like the barn and the stable and the chicken coop. And it was an old French movie studio, so there was a theater there, that was obvious. They had a swimming pool, and one was a pool hall. So all those names fit in. But one of the guys that was living in front of the pool hall was a real character. One day, well, almost all the doors had these little openings, and we call them peeps for short. And that's what they'd open up and look, check on you every morning and during the day or at night or whatever. One of the guards came by one day and did that. And after he walked off, this fella tapped his neighbor next door, says, "The first zoo I've ever been in where the animals look at the people." And from then on, it was the zoo. After the zoo, sometime during the summer of 70, the Vietnamese were readying a new facility for us at an existing army post out again to the west of Hanoi. And they had moved at least 2 groups in there earlier. One of them from the from the Son Tay prison where the raid took place later on. But it was the first time we had compound living, so to speak. It was a big, long barracks that was divided into several rooms. Excuse me. But after a few days, we were all out together. They'd come in, just unlock the doors in the morning. We had to run to the place till siesta time, noonish, when they'd put us back in for a couple hours, and then we'd be back out. We had to run to the place till time to lock up to go to bed. We had a latrine area and a wash shower area. It definitely, it was not Hogan's Heroes, but it was so much better than anything we had had. We were getting sunshine, exercise, and then the Son Tay raid popped in, and that was about 6-7 miles away. We heard all the fireworks and see the airplanes and activity, and it scared the bejesus out of the Vietnamese. 2 days later, we were all loaded up, now taken back down to the big prison, Waddell, downtown. And they had opened up an area in the back that we knew was back there because when I was there before, we could hear people back in there. They'd been using it for political prisoners as well as South Vietnamese prisoners they'd captured. And these cell blocks were roughly 25 feet by about 55 or 60. And they had up to 100 to 120 South Vietnamese in each one, and there were 50 to 57 of us in each one. And on the concrete slabs, you had about that much space. And we then had guys laying on bedboards around on the floor. It was a crowded sardine can, but it was so nice to be with people that you'd only heard names of for several years, but now you got a face to go with them, a personality, and you got new people to talk to and new stories to hear. And it was actually fun for a few days. The first stop that I made when we went out to the zoo was in the area that we called the Annex. There was a series of buildings, I think there were 9 or 10 of them, where they stored the film from the studio. And in fact, there were old rolls of film around and so on. And I was in this group of 3 other F-105 pilots that had been shot down in early October. We'd gotten there in late October. But none of us knew anything about the tap code. We'd tried to talk across the wall or do something to the group that was next to us. There were 2 units in each building. But we weren't getting anywhere until the next spring, like March. This Navy lieutenant commander came in who knew the code. He had heard it, but he hadn't had a chance to use it, wasn't very good at it. But we were over trying to get the guys next door to respond. And they was tapping on the wall, and we were giving names, and they were giving their names back.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, sir, but how did the code work? Was it a form of Morse code, or
No.
How did you know which letter was what tap?
Well, the quick background is one of the very early Air Force officers, I think he was number 6 or 7, shot down, had been talking to a German POW, one of ours who was a German POW in World War II, and talked about this code. And Smitty asked him, what is it? Is it Morse code? No, it's a little matrix, 5 by 5. Excuse me. You drop out the letter K because you can get the same sound using a C. It's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, right on down. And to tap it, you tap, the first tap is for the row, and the second tap's for the column. So a B would be 1, 2, 2. And my initial W, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, dot, dot. Now, A, dot, dot. And it seems cumbersome till you get it and get going. And once you get established doing it, it's like a lot of other things. You pick up a word from the context and you can get them to go on. And you can do it even faster than the telegraph key, I think. it was a lifesaver for us. But this first effort was really cumbersome. And when they were given their names back, this one came out, as I mentioned, there's no K, you use the C. It came back HICCE, something that doesn't make any sense. So you give him an error and get him to do it again. And about the third time, I don't know why it popped in my mind. I said, HIC, and then all of a sudden I remembered saying, ask if that's Jim. And so he went back, Jim, and came back, yes, and it's Jim Hickerson. And we had been fraternity brothers down here at Georgia Tech, stood side by side at initiation. He went in the Navy right away when I had that delay at Lockheed, but we'd seen each other about 2 years after both of us had our wings, but that would have been 10 years later right there in Hanoi. But it was after he and I were then moved, as we call it, across the wall into the main prison. He was up in the barn and I was in the pool hall. So we didn't communicate until about 2 years later when we had what I call a fruit basket turnover, and he moved in next door to me and had taken some of the bricks out of the windows, and I got to lean in and shake hands with him. But then when we went out to the camp we call Faith at the compound living, and then back into the other, we stayed together for the next 2.5, almost 2 years.
Thinking about the whole experience, you had to go through a range of, I shouldn't say you had to, I would imagine you went through a range of emotions.
Definitely.
In the beginning, you're a new opportunity for them. And then there must reach a point where the enemy says, we've done everything with this guy that's of value to us we can do, and now you just become, I shouldn't say just become, now you're a prisoner. When you think back, I mean, there had to be fear, boredom, hunger. I mean, how do you describe the stages of your imprisonment and what it did to you?
Well, first off was the startling realization that Air Force intelligence at survival school was out of touch with the real world. Because I asked the question as part of the process, what do you know about the POWs? So you're probably aware of the Hanoi March that had happened in the summer of '66. Oh, and by the way, one of the Navy guys was shot down a couple of days before that happened, and they put him in. He got down and got the president. His quote was one of the famous ones. He said, "You guys do this very often?" But I was concerned about it, and the sergeant told me in the Philippines, "Oh, we've had reports of really good treatment up there." It says they've been seen out in town at night in restaurants and theaters and stuff. And I'd been there about a week when I settled down enough, wish I could get my hands on that sergeant again. And also a Marine from Korea. But anyway, I was not prepared for the immediate torture, to be candid. Obviously, in survival school, we were taught name, rank, serial number, date of birth, according to the code of conduct, and evade further question to the best of your ability. But a German POW fellow, U.S. Air Force, who had been German POW when I was there, made the statement that if you have something that they want, they will get it. If you're by yourself, they'll get it out of you. If they're more than one, beware of things they'll do to play you off each other to get it. So once I got the name, rank, serial number, date of birth, and they said, "What was your target?" And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "What do you mean you don't know?" And his English wasn't that good, but I could understand it. But I used the fact that I couldn't to get him to repeat things to buy time to think about what I was doing and saying. But anyway, he let me know right away that name, rank, serial number is not going to cut it. Oh, in fact, that's one of the humorous things. I told you about faking that injury up in the mountain to get them to carry me. I tried the same thing with the Chinese. They brought in a doctor. He checked me out. Said, "No, you're okay." I said, "No, Deep, no, you're okay." When I get to Hanoi, now I'm in a new venue. So when the interrogator comes in, he says, "Sit." And he was at a table with this light little gooseneck thing down here with a stool down. He says, "Sit." So I start like I'm going to hobble over there. And he looks up and he says, "Maybe you best actor in survival school, but now you in Hanoi. Sit down." That alerted me. This guy is not a dummy. He's in touch. And over the course of the night, he convinced me that their intelligence was immediately up to date. He asked me 2 questions over the course. One I'd been briefed on it the day before I was shot down, and one the day I was shot down as top secret. And he asked me why this happened. First one was why the 104 or the F-4s no longer fly MiG-cap. And I said, "You mean they weren't up there today? I thought they were." And then he says, "Why can you not fly over Hanoi below 10,000 feet now?" And we'd just been briefed on that day because there's a French delegation in town. So once that confirmed that I got to be serious about this. And when he was asking these questions, what was your target? I said, "I don't know. I was a spare. I pulled in. I just followed them." Who else was in your flight? I don't know. Who's in your squadron? Well, I'm new. I've only been there a short time. He kept pressing for names, so I started coming up with guys from high school and from tech who were 4F or never in. I threw in some names of guys that had finished their mission and gone home to be good. And I kept cranking this, and finally, after I don't know how many hours, and several times of tying me up and passing out and coming back to consciousness, he said, "Why you keep lying?" I said, "I'm not lying." They said, "Yeah, you lie. Same day we shoot down man 357 Squadron, tells us everything." And I thought about that a minute, and I said, "Well, if he tells you, why you ask me?" He said, "I want to hear you say." So we're back to the game again. Name, rank, serial number, write down all the same questions. And I remember from survival school, if you're telling a lie and somebody else telling the truth, the liar's in trouble. And I thought, oh gosh, if he really did tell them, I'm in trouble. So I started pulling my answers back to more factual things, but not quite as best I could, but sweating it out. And finally, when he quit about daylight, and this had started a little after dark the night before, and I got the day off, and I lay there, and they brought me some soup and rice to eat, and I got to thinking, he really conned me. He played all those things they told me about in survival school. He did it, and then I bought it hook, line. There ain't nobody else up here now. There you go. And I never heard any reference about another guy till I got to the zoo with those new 105 pilots. And one of the guys had been at the other base at Karat. And he said, "Oh," he said, "I knew about you. You were shot down the same day as Ward Deitch." And he was a flight leader in another squad. I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Yeah, he and another guy were shot down that day. They were 357th Squadron. So yeah, they had the guy. They put him out as died in captivity about a week later." And once I got through the fear, and I mentioned the next day when I said he really hooked me, I got to shape up here and start earning my pay as a major in the United States Air Force. They came in the next morning and says, "Today you write your autobiography." I said, "No, I'm not going to do that. That's Dakota Tunka. You won't write." He said, "I ordered you to." I said, "I don't take orders from you." None of these guys wore rank, so you didn't know who you were talking to really, but they all look like kids. As you know, Orientals tend to look much younger than they are for a long, long time. But we went through that, and they said, "Well, I bring in a camp commander. He orders you to write." I said, "Okay." So he goes, and I was really being this flippant and blasé, no kidding. So he comes back in a few minutes with a guy about his age, same size. He says, "Now, this is the camp commander." And I said to myself, "Oh, yeah, this was Saturday morning." I said, "Oh, yeah, these guys were out drinking beer last night." They said, "Oh, we're going to have some fun with a new guy." He says, he asked, will you write your autobiography? I said, nope. He talked in Vietnamese. He says, he asked you one last time? I said, no. He talked to me. He says, he orders you to write your autobiography. I said, I take my orders from the Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. He talked a little more in Vietnamese, and he says, one more time? I shook my head. And the camp commander looks up in very good English and says, you will be very sorry. Got up and walked out. 2 or 3 minutes later, this big guy comes in, biggest Vietnamese I saw. And they put me on the ground, pulled my arms back up behind me. I couldn't do it again. My life depended on it. My palms were together behind my neck. I could scratch my neck. And they put Vietnamese handcuffs right there. And they walked out. And I thought, this ain't a big deal. About 5 minutes later, my hands were numb, my arms were numb, and shortly my shoulders were numb, and pretty soon my chest was numb. And so I started walking around so I could keep myself alert and active, I thought. Next thing I knew, I'm laying on the floor. I'd obviously fallen like that. And I did that 3 or 4 times till I just gave up, quit trying to walk around. And during the mealtime, that mealtime came, he comes in with a bowl of soup and a plate of rice and holds it up. And I said, oh, good. We're going to get a break here, get something to eat. He holds it up, sets it on the table, and he does that. And I shook my head. He walked over, picked it up, walked out. Like, maybe they are serious about this. Okay, I'll lay here a while longer. So I guess I passed out off and on, because the next time, the afternoon meal time came, he comes in with the soup and rice again, sets it down to that. And I said, no. But I had been conscious enough during the time that I realized I hadn't seen another American. I've been here for 4 days now. And this was the funny part. I haven't felt my hands all day. This is into the afternoon. I haven't felt anything from my waist up in a good while. If I can't use my hands, I can't feed myself. And I probably can't play golf again. So when he starts to pick up the stuff to go away, I said, wait a minute. And he turned around, does that, and I said, I'll try. He picks it up. And I said, okay. He turned around and nodded my head. He wouldn't leave till I said yes. So he left the suit, went out and got the officer. Came back, and the officer asked me, and I tried with him, I'll try. And he shook his head. So I said, okay. So he takes the handcuffs off, and I'd been through rope tying up before, and when they do that, the whole purpose is to cut off circulation, and when they release it, it's like grabbing an electric wire. If you've ever been shocked, by a house current. Well, this time when he came off, I just shook all over. And they brought in a little booklet, like I never had it down here, but they call it test booklets, the little blue book sort of thing lined with a whole thing of questions. Sit down and write. And so for about 3 or 4 days, I'd sit there and hold a pen in my mouth and push it around with my hands. And I'd get 6 or 8 words on a page that way and use up stuff. And there was questions, what's your name? And I put it down. What's your father's name? I put daddy. What's your mother's name? I put mommy. Where were you born? I put early age. Just Mickey Mouse. See, I don't know. I guess I was so beaten down by this point I didn't really care what they did. I was going to have some fun in the process. But they never referred to that again. And it proved, for me at least, the whole point was, we can make you do it. What that sergeant had said. We'll show you that we run this camp. You'll do what we tell you to do. So from then on, it's a game of how much I could keep them from doing. And then that night, when you were asking, this was really my low point. When I ate that meal and realized that I had been broken. And so we had a big thunderstorm. It rained, and I was so thirsty. They hadn't given me any water except when the interrogator would be there, and he'd have a cup and offer it. And I remember I got up and I pulled the table over, put the chair on it, put the stool on it, and got up where I could get this vent, and reached out and got a hold of a limb on the tree so that the rain coming down and run down and I get some water off my arm. And then it quit raining about the time I got it. And so I went over and leaned up against a wall, just slumped down, and there was one light way over in the corner. And I looked up, and it just kept attracting my attention. And I remember thinking it was like Moses in the burning bush, I guess. And I sat there and I looked at the light. And whether it was a split second or an hour, I can't tell you. But I had an experience of something happened to me, and it was all over. I was feel very comfortable, very secure. You're going to live, you're going to get out of this, and you'll go home someday. And from then on, I was able to accept things that happened, and when there would be a crackdown right after escape in a night camp, and other things that would come down, you'd have a little sense that this might be bad. I could just think about it for a minute, and I could feel comfortable again and go on and do what I had to do. And I remember thinking Harry Truman made the statement as president that he had no trouble sleeping every night because he knew he had done the best that day that he knew to do, and he needed his rest for the next day. And I realized that I was able to do that. I could lie down every night and go to sleep, no matter what was going on.
And how long had you been a prisoner when that happened?
I was shot down on Wednesday afternoon, and that was Saturday night.
So
3 days.
3 days after you were shot down, you feel you had a moment that gave you, I won't call it peace, but gave you something that got you through the rest of those years.
Yep.
Was there a day in that prison camp after that you didn't feel that awareness or didn't think about that? Or did that sustain you every single day?
I can't say that I thought it consciously every day, but the feeling was there every day.
And what do you think about that now? What do you think that was?
It still sustains me, and the experience that I had there after we were in those large groups, we started, after some confrontations with the Vietnamese, we started having Sunday church services. And I thought about it a lot. You know, what does this mean to me? What do I do? And I participated, not as an activist, but participated in the services, attended. And when I got home, I went to see another one of our classmates down here at Georgia Tech who had become an Episcopal minister. And I talked to him about it and asked him, you know, how did you make the transition? Because he had been a technical major. How did you make the transition to the, and told me experience. And the first assignment I had when I got back was at the Air War College. And one of my classmates there was a Catholic priest that I got to know fairly well. And I was still in this time, you know, I was saved in that ejection. I went through this other experience. What am I here for? And the Catholic priest helped me put it in the best perspective. He said, don't try to solve the problem. He said, you go through your life looking for the sign or looking for this or what. And he said, you may miss what you're actually here for. He said, just accept the fact that you're here and make the most of it that you can. And that's really what's been with me ever since.
Not like 5.5, almost 6 years a prisoner. How did you find out you were going home and when you were going home? And tell me about that experience.
Well, to put it all in perspective, when Nixon started the bombing again in May of '72, we were in the big prison there at Wallow. And somebody that went to quiz, as we called the interrogations, because it was easier to say and to tap, brought back a message that Nixon is crazy man. We don't know what happens now. But we had in our camp one South Vietnamese prisoner and 3 Thai prisoners who were allowed out to work and do things, and of course they were speaking the language, and they were really our intelligence. And we got a heads up that 209 was the number, literally, were going to be moved out of camp. And sure enough, about a week later, 209 of us were moved right up to the Chinese border, deep in the mountains, and a camp that we thought initially was new to us. We learned later on that others had been there ahead of us, who I don't know. But we spent the rest of 72 there and over the winter. And in October, we didn't have radios in each cell there. They didn't have power like we had back in the big prison. We had these little radios in each room, and you got these propaganda broadcasts. Hanoi, Hana, we called it, the voice of Vietnam, all the garbage. Up here, they had to do it by quizzes. And one of the fellows that went early picked up, they were asking him, what do you think about this proposed end of the war, or whatever? This is in early October. And then I was called out right at the end of October. And he asked me, he said, are you disappointed there was no settlement in October? I said, no, I didn't know there were going to be one. So how can I be disappointed for something I didn't know was going to happen? Wasn't going to happen anyway. And kind of went on with that. And then over Christmas and the holiday and New Year's, it got really cold, and we were settling in. All of us were looking to be there in the winter. And one night, the building I was in up the top of the hill, one of the fellows woke us up and said, we just had 3 trucks come into camp. So we all stayed up and we counted 17 trucks. You don't need that many to bring in a month's load of food. Something is up. And the guards came around that morning and let us out to go out to eat or to shave, whatever we're going to do. We had a little area, kind of a little patio we could get out to in our building. And he looks around at one of the other guys, and he does this. And then he goes back like that. Something is really up here. So we went back in, and just so we didn't miss out on it, we all started rolling up our gear. That afternoon, when the guard came around and opened it up, and he gives us this, which was the signal to roll up, ready to move, we just all leaned over, patted our roll. He got a big smile on his face, and right after dark, they loaded us on the trucks, headed back to Hanoi, and about halfway down mid-afternoon, we stopped and had a little coffee break. They gave us water and little energy bars, coconut bar stuff. And instead of getting back on the truck necessarily that you were on, they divided us out in 4 categories. And what turned out to be the first 2 release groups went back to the big prison. The 3rd release group went to the one we called a plantation, and the 4th one went to the zoo. And, excuse me, we'd been back about a week, and I was at the plantation in the 3rd group. They called us out one afternoon. We lined up, and the camp commander came over, and he read us the protocol from the Paris Treaty that in itself required that the prisoners be notified within 48 hours of this date. And they were told it, and they stood there for a few minutes waiting for us to do something, and when we didn't, they said, okay, dismissed, and we all filed back into our own little cells, and then we went over hugging each other. So, God, I hope it's true, hope it's true. And in my particular case, I was pulled out and taken up to Wallow. It turns out that after the first release group, there was a little difference of opinion between, and the conditions for release were that everybody would be released in 4 equal increments over the next 60 days. So, and with the sick and wounded being released first. Well, the U.S. expected that to be release the sick and wounded, then 4 more increments. The Vietnamese interpreted it to be the sick and wounded would be in the first increment. So they had a little hassle about that. And somehow they came up and released 20 guys, just pulled almost at random, came out. So as that was going on, I was pulled up to the second release group. Then they decided, no, the count didn't work, so I went back to the plantation. And then they pulled me out again. And whatever the problem was, we were supposed to be released on the 1st of March. And the camp commander came in, and we had the big, going away thing, special dinner, blah, 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 on the night of, last night in February. And then he told us, he said, maybe you do not go tomorrow. There is a small problem. I will let you know. So the next morning he comes in and said, I don't think so today. And that night he said, maybe tomorrow. And then by March the 3rd, we were said, oh, to hell with it. I hope somebody got out of here anyway. And he came in that night and he says, I think tomorrow, okay. And sure enough, the next morning he comes in and came in. There was a group called, I forget the exact name, but there were an Indian, a Canadian, a Czech, and another Soviet Union type. Had to come around and inspect everybody. So they came through. We figured, I think we might make it today. And sure enough, about an hour later, we started going out. We got our go-home clothes that we'd been fitted for. We went out to pick them up, put them on. And they walked us out the front gate, and they had their little 20-seat buses out there, and we all got on and headed over to Jialam for the big trip home.
I'd like to hear this.
Well, we got out there as we pulled out onto the ramp, and I saw that 141 out there. Of course, working out there, my neighbor at Craig had gotten out of the Air Force and was test pilot in 141, and I'd walked out into one just before I left to go to Southeast Asia. And when I saw that airplane, the United States of America, and that big flag up there, and I told a lot of people, when I walked down and walked up that ramp, I could smell the red clay out of North Georgia. I knew I was going home.
Is that just an expression, or did you really feel like you smelled?
I started feeling like I'm headed home, yeah.
Well, the one question I want to ask you, the penultimate, next to the last, is a lot of things changed for you while you were a prisoner. You found out about losing your father and losing other family members and your wife. And again, if you don't mind my asking, what sustained you through that?
Well, I had premonitions, or indications, I guess you'd say, on both. I only got 2 letters from my wife, and they were 6 lines, but she only used about 4 of them. So all she just said was, the children are fine, they help a lot. Another one was, I moved to Atlanta to go to Emory, the children doing well. You could almost read into it the indifference. And in the case of my dad, the one thing that I got from my mother was a birthday card that was signed Love, Mother. And that was probably one of the really low points when I realized he was gone, because I was looking forward to seeing him. I knew he was in bad shape when I left, but I was looking forward to going back and seeing him again. And so when I got there to Clark, we'd been there, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours, and they came around and got me and said, there's a colonel up here who wants to see you. And he introduced himself from 13th Air Force Headquarters. And we were standing in the doorway to the little ward area that I was in, and I looked up, and a technician that had been zooming around was leaned up to the desk up here about 20, 30 feet. And I don't know why I turned around. There was another technician back standing around over here. This is not going to be a standard conversation. What is it? So he started out casually, told me about my aunt dying and my uncle dying and my father-in-law dying, and then your father died, and then your wife got a divorce. And as I've described it, it wasn't a surprise. It was the shock of confirmation. The things I was hoping weren't true. but I had a sense. And it was kind of ironic when I learned about more detail about my wife's divorce. When I was up in the mountains and I hadn't gotten anything, heard anything, I went to a quiz and I asked an officer whom I'd known from way back at the zoo. I said, I hadn't heard anything from my wife in a long time. I said, I'm wondering if maybe something has happened. I said, no, I think everything's fine. And I said, well, I would really like to know. I don't want my children to be hurting or having any problem. He said, okay, I ask. And several months later, I went to quiz with him again, and he said, I asked. He said, I think everything okay. As it turns out, that first quiz was within a week of when she filed for the divorce, and the second one was within a week of when it was granted. And they had sent the paperwork to Hanoi to camp a detention, and since I didn't reply within 30 days, I wasn't contesting it. Well, I was still going through the checkout down at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama, but my mother wanted to get the family together at home and visit. And so I flew up commercially, and my ex-wife was here in town at the time. She came out and picked me up at the airport, and we went over to her house, and we were talking. I was going to take my children out with me for this party, and we were sitting there talking, and she said, how you plan on getting to Bremen? Oh, gosh. That didn't cross my mind. Oh, well, I'll rent a car. Oh, no, I guess I can't do that. I don't have a driver's license. Why? I didn't think of riding the bus. I don't know, because that'd been right off the bat. I thought, well, maybe Pat will rent me an airplane, because I had a pilot's license, commercial license. And I wasn't thinking of the fact that you got to have a medical to make it effective. But she said, well, you better do something. So this is getting kind of late if you're going out there tomorrow. So I called him up. I don't know, I guess we were looking at the phone book. I got him at home. And I said, hey, you got any airplane you might rent out tomorrow? He says, what for? I said, well, I need to get out to Bremen with me and the children. He said, when you want to go? And I said, oh, sometime mid-morning or so. He says, hold on a minute. He looked around and he said, how's about 10 o'clock? Would that be good? 10:30? I said, yeah, it'd be fine. So he said, well, you know how to get out to my place? And I said, yeah. He said, all right, I'll see you then. So we come driving up out here, and it turns out he had a demonstration set up for a hope for sale with a King Air, I think it was. Anyways, about an 8 or 10 place airplane. And this company, people were here, and they were really nice, welcoming us in, and said, yeah, we'll be glad. And they gave me a ride out to West Georgia Airport, and my brother was there to pick me up. But Pat and I have laughed about that a lot of times.
Those 6 years of your life that you literally gave to this country, and all that happened to you, what would you say to young people? Or what would you, if you could get them all to pay attention to you for the next minute, what would you say?
Well, first I would say that I'm proud of my service. At the time I was there, I honestly believed that we were doing something that needed to be done, because the threat of communism and the expansion of China and their efforts to, particularly in Asia and in Southeast Asia, could have had very difficult future. And while we did not win, and unfortunately I think I have to say we actually did win the combat. Our politicians gave it away later on. But we did accomplish a stalemate, so to speak, and I think we stopped that expansion, gave those countries a chance to get on a little firmer basis. As far as Vietnamese people, I was disappointed for them, the boat people, that many were killed or died in the process of getting out of there, and in Cambodia that were literally killed during the Pol Pot regime. I don't think we can take any pride at all in allowing that to happen, but when we finally started recognizing the Vietnamese. I was asked by one of the local stations, what do you think about it with the trade and then the recognition? And I said, well, we're going over there to give them a chance for self-determination, and it looks like they're finally going to get it. And on the 2 trips I've made back over there, I think we really did win the hearts and minds because they really like Americans there now. But for the status now and the condition and the future of this country, I have real concern. The last few years, the mood of the country, the culture of the country, society have changed in ways that I cannot say that I feel proud about. But I do talk to enough young people who have good attitudes and good patriotic values that I'm optimistic that they will rise to the top and be the cream of the crop, and we'll get this country back on track someday.